Okay, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's see. Here it is. Okay, hoping you all can see that. Okay, get that out of the way. All right, welcome everybody. So the plan is to speak for, a little over an hour and then open the floor for Q&A, because that's always fun, and to go into things that you would like me to focus more on. I want to give a broad overview of what the Nutritarian diet is, because I want people to utilize that term, Nutritarian diet, to describe a diet that's ideally designed to maximize human lifespan, slow aging, prevent cardiovascular death, prevent cancer, and prevent dementia. In other words, let's populate the amount of calories we can consume each day. Let's populate those calories with foods that have the most benefit. And when you do that, you're a nutritarian, when you're looking to consume foods to maximize your health and lifespan. And so we're talking here about what a nutritarian diet is and why I'm encouraging people to use this terminology, because I think that there isn't terminology that describes a diet that includes the healthiest foods that humans should be eating, right? So a nutritarian diet is a vegetable-based diet. It's not grain-based. It's not fruit-based. It's not meat-based. It's not processed food-based. It's vegetable-based. Most we're eating by, on your size of your plate, and you can only have, a limited amount of calories you can eat each day. Some people need less calories. Some people need more calories. But we all have some limit to the amount of calories we're supposed to be eating each day. And with that limited amount of calories that you're going to eat each day, the question is, how much are you going to populate that with healthy food? And then also, we're talking about the nutritarian diet utilizes a wide variety of foods, because we're going to talk a lot about the variety of phytonutrients, the wide diversity of phytonutrients, and the diversity of different types of fibers, because there's hundreds of types of fibers in different foods, and there's probably 1,000 different thousands of phytonutrients. And the more diversity we get, essentially, the longer we live. And as a nutritarian, I'm specifically recommending that people consume G-bombs daily. And the reason why I'm recommending G-bombs daily, because those 6 categories of foods have the most evidence in scientific studies to show they prolong lifespan and protect against cancer. So we're talking here, the G-bombs are, of course, that's an acronym that stands for greens, beans or legumes, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, sesame seeds. And so us nutritarians are trying to keep in the back of our mind, did we put some mushrooms in our diet today? We're trying to have some mushrooms every single day. Did I have some seeds in my salad dressing, my sesame seeds in my salad dressings, or flax seeds in my oatmeal for breakfast? Did I remember to have some fruit with berries or cherries, some high polyphenol fruits? Did I have some onion or scallion or garlic every day? Did I have legumes? Did I have are my carbohydrate choices, are I paying attention to legumes or beans have the most favored and lifespan promoting carbohydrate source? Am I utilizing that as a primary source of carbohydrates? So in other words, we're eating all these foods each day. We're not only eating G-bombs, we're not only eating those foods, but we're paying attention to including those foods in our diet each day, and to include them in robust amounts. So first I wanted to mention the green category, or the green vegetable category, because I could say that we are a green vegetable dependent animal, that if you don't eat sufficient quantity of green vegetables, you can't have optimal health and longevity. Some people don't like green vegetables. I always say, if you don't like green vegetables, then live close to a hospital, because you're not going to have good health, because green vegetables support the growth of a healthy microbiome. The billions of bacteria that live in our gut are based on diversity of the bacterial species that make for a healthy gut. And the type of bacteria you grow are based on the foods that you eat, right? And the bacteria another person grows are different bacteria based on the foods that they regularly eat. And one of the best sources of raw material to grow healthy bacteria is the sulfoquinavose in lettuce, for example. Lettuce is a huge protective food. But the other things besides raw lettuces and raw green vegetables, like or raw cruciferous vegetables like arugula or baby bok choy or or kale or radish or other besides those other watercress, besides lettuce and cruciferous vegetables, the combination of vegetables in our diet, the variety of different vegetables we eat, and how much vegetables we eat correlates best with longevity. The more vegetables we eat, the less cardiovascular death, and the less vegetables we eat, the less cancer deaths, of course. But I'm also saying here that there are certain powerful protective nutrients in raw vegetables that are formed in the mouth as you chew the vegetable. And the better you chew, the more you form those beneficial compounds, particularly the isothiocyanates in raw cruciferous vegetables, which we call ITCs. The abbreviation of isothiocyanates are ITCs. So I'm saying that ITCs are a critical compound in cruciferous vegetables that are not in the vegetable yet until you masticate or chew the vegetable and break open the cell walls. Because in a little packet in the cell wall of the vegetable is this enzyme called myrosinase, which forms the ITCs in your mouth. And as you chew it and mix it with saliva and the bacterial between in the teeth, you form more beneficial anti-inflammatory compounds and you produce more ITCs. Matter of fact, cruciferous vegetables are extremely protective against cancer, but some studies don't show they're as protective as other studies show. But when we look at urinary ITCs, that means how much ITCs actually got in the blood of the urine, we see an impeccable dose-dependent relationship between urinary ITCs and cancer protection. Let me explain for a minute, okay? Because look, if I'm saying the ITCs are formed in the mouth based on when you're chewing the vegetable, they're forming in the mouth. You're churning the glucosinolate in the cruciferous cell with the enzyme, and the wall is producing a chemical reaction in your mouth as you chew, and you form. And the better you chew, the more of those beneficial compounds you form. So you could eat broccoli and you could eat kale, but if you're either overcooking it and destroying the activity of the ITCs, or you're not chewing it well, then you still could be eating cruciferous vegetables and not getting the full benefit of cancer protection. So we have to eat some of them raw, or at least conservatively cooked, so like cooking it in a wok and not overcooking it, let's say. And so we're eating vegetables that are not overcooked, or we're eating them raw, and we're mindful and cognizant enough to chew them very well, because the better we chew, the more ITCs that are formed in the body, in the blood, and gets into the urine. And that's where we see the dose-dependent relationship. So it's not what you eat that determines your health necessarily. It's how well you chew what you eat that determines your health. So we're just defining that a little further, tweaking it, that little health hack to really focus when you're eating a salad. How well you're chewing that salad? You're going to try to resist swallowing and masticate it enough so you can form it into a liquid. I'm going to add those sprouts on my salad, right? You guys know that, maybe you've heard that broccoli sprouts, radish sprouts, alfalfa, all these sprouts could have 40 to 50 times as much of the ITCs in the broccoli sprouts compared to a piece of broccoli. But are you going to waste those beneficial anti-cancer compounds that when they rise in your system, they have more anti-cancer effects? Are you going to waste them by hardly chewing it? Or you're going to get the maximum benefit of what you put in your mouth by fully liquefying it before you allow it to be swallowed. So I'm making that point, and I'm pointing out in this slide that over 300 studies show that raw vegetables have the most consistent and powerful association, the reduction of cancers of all types. Can you memorize those words? I tell people can you memorize that? It's not hard to memorize. Here's what I want you to memorize. Raw vegetables have the most consistent and powerful association with the reduction of cancers of all types. You can memorize that, right? It's not too hard to say. Raw vegetables have the most consistent and powerful association with the reduction of cancers of all types. So, and chew them real well, and don't waste the fact that you're looking to live a long time. There's no anti-aging or longevity promoting substance that's more powerful than eating a big salad every day that you chew very well. So the ITCs, which we're talking about here from cruciferous vegetables, have been shown in studies to have marked effects on enabling the cells to remove carcinogenic material and toxins. So our best protection against chemical exposure in our environment is to eat a lot of cruciferous vegetables, right? They prevent carcinogens from binding to the DNA, they detoxify carcinogens, and they enable the body to remove dangerous and toxic substances from the body. They also, of course, are angiogenesis inhibitors, which that means that the word angiogenesis means the growth of blood vessels to fuel the growth of fat. And when we have high levels of insulin in response to eating a lot of sugar in our diet or being overweight, because when you're overweight, you're more insulin resistant. And when you eat a high glycemic food, when you're overweight, you produce a higher insulin response because you need more insulin to get the sugar out of the blood when you're overweight. And the high level of insulin, which is the primary fat storage hormone, promotes the growth of blood vessels to fuel the fat to allow it to grow. And in doing so, it permissively allows cancer cells to replicate. So one of the ingredients in the witch's cauldron of cancer causation is you want to have a lot of insulin circulating and a lot of insulin resistance if you want to create cancer in a person's body. Who wants to create cancer? We want to have insulin sensitivity, not insulin resistance. But the point here is that these ITCs from green vegetables are anti-angiogenic. They don't let tumor cells replicate. They don't let fat cells grow. And they actually improve immune function to recognize cancer cells or abnormal cells and to activate the natural killer T cells to destroy an abnormal cell even before it can become cancerous. And of course, they help remove excess estrogen from the body. In other words, there's a huge amount of studies showing how ITCs work to prevent cancer. And we know that the viability and robust immune function circulates in the body. These cells circulate all over our body, and they harbor and live in the intraepithelial lymphocytes that line the digestive tract. So you could say that the defenders at the gates of the castle, when things first come into our body, bacteria, viruses, poisons, smoke, whatever things we're eating that we shouldn't be, that are not good for us, there's some contaminants in it. We have a defense system that looks at everything that comes into the body. And this is the immune system that lives right behind the villi in the small intestines. And what I'm saying is that these intraepithelial lymphocytes develop and are fed by the aryl hydrocarbon receptor that's activated by the ITCs in cruciferous vegetables and by bacteria in the gut that are fed by other green vegetable compounds, such as found in lettuce. That the combination of lettuce, raw greens, with raw cruciferous is how we maximize the immune function of our gut, right? And retain the viability and protective function of the gut. Matter of fact, we're talking here about preventing inflammation in the gut, protecting the integrity of the gut, and having diverse and healthy microbiome. And those foods that activate the healthiest type of bacteria are these two raw foods. The raw green vegetables I'm talking about here, right? This combination of raw vegetables and raw onion or scallion. Onion or scallion, tremendously powerful, to the beneficial gut bacteria. And then two cooked foods that have tremendous beneficial effects on building a healthy biofilm in the gut. We're talking about cooked mushrooms and cooked beans or legumes. Very powerful effects at protecting the microbiome. And I'm saying this robust and healthy microbiome that creates this healthy biofilm of the villi and the small intestines with the healthy immune system behind that barrier, right? That utilizes certain nutrients and prevents toxins from entering the digestive tract, the bloodstream. And it also slows the absorption of glucose in the bloodstream from anything you eat. So when you have a mango, how do you turn that moderate glycemic mango into a lower glycemic food or a low glycemic food? Well, you have a robust microbiome because you're eating mushrooms and onions and leafy green vegetables and beans. And that healthy microbiome slows the absorption of glucose, lowering what's the glycemic load of that meal, right? and lowering insulin resistance, making you more insulin sensitive. So the G bombs make you more insulin sensitive because they all have anti-angiogenic effects. They're all anti-fat storage effects because they don't let fat grow and they don't promote insulin. They reduce the production of insulin, which is the fat storage hormone. We're keeping that as low as possible in the most favored range. So all these things work together where you can control your longevity and your health destiny by dialing up these foods and dialing down the foods that are more calorically rich, that don't have these beneficial effects, right? Your genes reflect what you eat more than they reflect what your genetics are. Your genetics are a small amount contribution to your overall health. Your genes, what you eat, the genes modify themselves and change themselves. And scientists call, when you eat a lot of green vegetables, scientists call it gene silencing, because these same foods protect the abnormal portion of genes that could have been expressed. It shuts them off. It silences them. So you don't develop disease when you have the BRCA. We showed that the high consumption of green cruciferous vegetables turned off the BRCA1 and GSP1 gene that could increase the woman's risk of breast cancer, for example. So gene silencing is that our genes are reflective of what we're eating. And the second meal effect is the term that scientists use that shows that you have a lower glycemic response to anything you eat because you have a healthy biofilm from eating a wide diversity of different fibers. So here's a study on more than 100,000 Asians showing that as people ate more green vegetables, particularly in this study, more cruciferous vegetables, accordingly, they lived longer, and the healthiest long-lived people were people who ate the most cruciferous vegetables. And I think this is the only food I've seen that has so much of a non-threshold effect. No threshold means tomato sauce is good for you. When you eat a certain amount, you're getting full benefit. Mushrooms are good for you, but you already ate half a cup of mushrooms. An extra cup's not going to benefit you. You had your half a cup. You already had your half a cup of onions. You only eat 3 cups of raw onion. I had a half a cup of raw onion. That's going to give you a great benefit. But not with green vegetables. When people went from 1 cup to 2 cups to 3 cups to 4 cups, you still saw enhancement in lifespan potential. So we are a green vegetable animal. We're supposed to be eating a lot of green vegetables. All right, moving on to beans now. We're going through those G-bombs, right? We're saying here that beans are tremendously protective against early life death, and they're protective against cancer, cardiovascular death, diabetes. They have a whole bunch of properties that makes them our favorite carbohydrate source. In other words, we score carbohydrates on a hierarchical scale of quality, and beans are at the top. Because if we look at this hierarchical scale, and I'm just putting a few carbohydrate choices up here, I'm not putting all of them. We buy a million different grains and things, kamut and amaranth and quinoa. But just picking some carbohydrates and looking at how much fiber they contain and how much resistant starch they contain and how much anti-cancer phytonutrients they contain and how much protein they contain, right? And beans win the prize. They win it by a mile. They have the most resistant starch, and they have the most slowly digestible starches too, which means they're low for the amount of calories they contain. Those calories enter the bloodstream slowest of any other carbohydrate source, and it's slow entry of calories that makes for a smaller need for insulin. The lowest insulin response occurs as a source of carbohydrates with beans, because their calories enter the bloodstream little bit at a time, not in a surge. A surge of calories entering the bloodstream all at one time is called the glycemic load, right? And we're saying the higher the glycemic load, the more unfavored it is. And that's why beans are such a favored carbohydrate, because they have the most slowly digestible carbohydrates. And some of their carbohydrate content is resistant to enzymatic degradation. It's resistant starch, and it doesn't come into the body as a calorie. It just acts as a prebiotic for the bacteria in the gut to fuel the growth of good bacteria in the gut and to produce more anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate, which is not only health beneficial, but it also has a negative feedback loop to the apostat in the hypothalamus. So the butyrate is one of the factors controlling our appetite. Going back a slide for a minute, I'm saying beans contain a lot of favorable anti-cancer nutrients like inositol pentachous phosphate that causes apoptosis of supports immune function and drives apoptosis or death of cancer cells. Beans are higher in protein than you think because remember, if their carbohydrate content, if I say a bean is 30% protein, and I'm saying 10% of the carbohydrates that you're counting don't get absorbed, if we look at the total amount of absorbed calories, the protein in a bean is even greater than 30%, right? So beans are very, very rich protein source. And of course, they balance the protein in nuts and seeds and green vegetables to give you an excellent protein supply when you eat green vegetables, beans, and some nuts and seeds in the same meal. Not only does that give you a very complete and adequate protein, but it also activates, tremendously affects through bacteria action and the GLP-1 inhibitors that suppress your appetite. And because the nuts and seeds is a source of fat and protein, go into the bloodstream so slowly, and beans into the bloodstream so slowly, and they both have calories that don't become absorbed. They cause you to feel satisfied or satiated with less calories, and they cause you to feel sustained energy for many, many hours and not hungry for many hours, leading you more comfort and more control over your appetite. So here's a study, for example, that showed just 2 servings of beans a week decreased risk of breast cancer in the Nurses' Health Study compared to people who ate no beans. That's just 2 servings a week. And I'm of course suggesting you eat some every day. And I'm also suggesting that if you don't digest beans well, you should learn how to digest them well. If they cause too much gas or bloating, then what you do is you have just a teaspoon of beans with every single meal. With breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you have little chickpeas or little black lentils or a little bit something with every meal, with every single meal, until you can, over time, increase the volumes a little bit and handle and be able to digest them better. You can train the body how to digest those foods better. And of course, this slide is saying at the bottom there, but high glycemic diets, sugar, honey, maple syrup, white flour, high diets high in white potato. We're talking about a high white rice, high glycemic diets increase risk of cancer, including we're using breast cancer as an example. High glycemic diets increased by 87% compared to utilizing beans, which lower risk of, right? We're talking here about lower the risk. So beans are your superfood, and onions have been shown in multiple studies to protect against cancer, even with moderate consumption. And raw onion is the most protective because the raw onion contains that enzyme alliinase, ALLIINASE. That's the enzyme that forms the sulfenic acid that burns your eyes when you cut the onion. And now you guys know the rest of the story. It's that when you cut the onion and it's making your eyes burn, you're forming multiple anti-cancer compounds simultaneously because the alliinase enzyme is creating these beneficial compounds. And if you could chew that onion to a liquid in your mouth, you'll multiply the amount of anti-cancer compounds formed in your mouth by 20-fold over when you're just slicing it thin. So you can slice it thin, but put it in your mouth. Now, if you cook the onion first, let's say you boiled it in your soup, and then you took it out of the soup, and then you cut it or blended it, you would deactivate most of those beneficial organosulfide compounds, right? So you got to eat it raw and chew it well in your salad, including putting scallion. I put scallions on my vegetable dish, right? And I sprinkle raw dehydrated garlic granules into my soup or onto my vegetables because I'm putting raw dehydrated garlic, which is another source of these beneficial powerful anti-cancer compounds. And it's actually the seasoning that makes the food taste even better. So the highest consumer of onions have a dramatic protection against cancer. And as you may have heard, onions lower cholesterol, they lower blood pressure, and they lower diabetic parameters. Their onions, and this garlic and onions are a magical superfood. They reduce risk of all causes of death, and they help you control and if you were looking to lose weight, you're looking to control your blood sugar and your high blood pressure, then just eat more onions and garlic, right? These are superfoods. And then we're moving on to mushrooms, to the M and G bombs. And mushrooms are incredibly powerful, and us nutritarians are not just eating mushrooms, we're trying to incorporate a variety of mushrooms in our diet. Remember we talked about one of the primary, what we're striving for on a nutritarian diet is nutritional diversity and fiber diversity. So we're trying to have diversity of green vegetables, diversities of berries and fruit, diversity of different types of mushrooms in our diet, diversity of different types of seeds in our diet, seeds and more, and variety of nuts. We're looking for a variety of, so we're trying to increase the variety of different types of foods, and different types of mushrooms have different benefits, but they all are tremendously powerful in two factors. One is angiogenesis inhibition, which means they have anti-cancer effects. They don't let blood vessels grow to feed cancer. They're immune system activators. They tremendously and powerful make for a healthy microbiome, the right microbiota in your bacteria in your gut. And they cause inhibition of aromatase, which is the enzymes that produce extra estrogen in the body. So because mushrooms so powerfully lower estrogen, almost like a drug, like tamoxifen, right? They bring estrogens down to the most favored level. And if you need estrogen, it doesn't take them away completely. It's not going to prevent you from getting pregnant, but it brings you down to the most favored level of estrogens that inhibit the production, breast cancer and prostate cancer. So they have beneficial effects for all types of cancers, very powerfully protective against breast and prostate cancer, and they help the immune system recognize abnormal cells. And they're nature's richest source of not glutathione, but ergothioneine. But they're the richest source of ergothioneine, which we have ergothioneine receptors on cells that help stabilize the cell's DNA and have anti-aging effects, and mushrooms contain that the most. Okay, so moving on to berries, right? After the M and G bombs, we're going to the B and G bombs, because berries and some other fruits like cherries and and kumquats, right? Some other foods, but particularly berries, and particularly like blackberries, because they have all the skin and those little tiny bumps on them, right? They're all more surface area. And wild blueberries are particularly powerfully effective against cancer. And I'm saying that I recommend people use frozen berries. Go to one of those big stores like Costco and buy those bags of frozen organic berries, or go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's and get those bags of wild frozen blueberries, because I'm recommending that frozen berries are so good, because especially frozen organic berries are so great because they don't come shipped to us from around the country, and if they're organic and they're fresh, a lot of times time they get to us, they could be moldy, right? Or they don't have any shelf life, and they've been picked when they're not ripe enough. So here you get much higher quality berry, and you get the flavor locked in, and you don't get you get the frozen, so they don't need to be treated with fungicides. They're organic, so in other words, use frozen berries on a regular basis. I still want you to eat other fruits besides berries, but you're paying attention to eating some of these berries every day, because they've been shown in too many studies to have beneficial effects at preventing cancer formation and even causing reversal of precancerous tumors. So incredibly powerful effect. And believe it or not, even though they taste sweet, they have anti-diabetic effects, right? So these are really, what I'm saying is like magical how protective foods are. And one of the protective effects of seeds, and why us nutritarians, I'm saying, are living so much longer than standard American diet people. But I'm saying nutritarians are living so much longer than people in the blue zones are living. This is not a blue zone diet. Blue zones live a little bit longer than the average American. We're trying to live a lot longer than the average. Blue zones live maybe 5 to 8 years longer than the average American on the average. And we're talking about living, 20 to 25 years longer than the average American. And nutritional science has made such radical advances in the last decade. And we could design a dietary portfolio to slow aging and live longer than our ancestors could have possibly done. And a person who's taking advantage of nutritional science to tweak their diet to a higher level of excellence over and above what a blue zone does, that's what us nutritarians do. And think about this for a minute. Lignans are a fiber type phytonutrient that are converted by bacteria in the gut into enterolignans, which have very powerful anti-estrogenic effects, which prevent breast cancer and prostate cancer. And overall, they have profound benefits to protect against cardiovascular disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality. In other words, they make people live longer. We can almost wipe out cancer if we got people eating this way with all these beneficial foods. That's the whole point. You can live without fear. And the combination, I'm saying, between the lignans and the high fiber intake and the fiber diversity, I'm mentioning fiber diversity, you just can't take Metamucil or take like, wheat fiber or whatever, psyllium, and think you're going to improve your health. You have to take a variety of fibers. You got to eat a variety of foods to get a variety of these fibers in. And of course, the more you take out the fiber out of your diet, and how do you take the fiber out of your diet? Of course, people eating white flour and oil and stuff, processed foods with no fiber. But every calorie that you could have consumed from nuts and seeds, instead of oil, when you put oil on your food, you could have eaten those calories from nuts and seeds and gotten more fiber. When you put oil on your food, you could have eaten nut and seed instead of those fat calories and gotten more protein, right? Because the average American consumes 500 calories of oil a day, and that sucks out probably 20 grams of protein from their diet if they consumed, instead of those 500 calories of oil, if they consume 500 calories of nuts and seeds, or 500 calories of beans in place of that oil, they would have just got 20 grams more protein. And we know that the more plant protein you get, the longer you live, right? So oil is shortening lifespan by multiple mechanisms. We'll talk about that further as we move forward here in this presentation. But I'm saying right now that the average American is eating maybe 100 micrograms of lignin a day, and the average nutritarian is eating 20 to 30 grams of lignins a day. That's 300 times that amount. Like 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed has about 20 grams of lignin in it. Huge. 1 tablespoon of ground chia seeds, about 8 grams of lignin. Huge. 1 tablespoon of sesame seeds, unhulled with the hull on, has about 16, 17 milligrams of lignin in it. We're eating sesame seeds in the dressing for lunch, or for a tablespoon of flax and chia seeds on my morning oats or my morning berries or whatever I'm doing. Today I didn't have the oats in there. I just had the chia seeds and the flax seeds in with my berry mix, with a little bit of soy milk, and I had some dried apricots cut up that were soaked overnight. It was really delicious. But in any case, I just had the seeds in there with the berry. Didn't even put the oats or the groats. Sometimes I make oat groats, or oat groats with black lentils, or different types of, or amaranth, but a little bit of grain mixed in there. But today I just had it without the grain, just had it with the berries and the seeds, and it was great. It tasted fantastic. Anyway, the point is, us nutritarians with all the different seeds, and chickpeas are high in lignins too, right? Chickpeas have a huge amount of lignins. We get lignins from beans, we get lignins from seeds, and so us nutritarians are getting a diet very high in lignins, which is tremendously protective against prostate and breast cancer. This is why people get cancer, because they don't eat these foods that are so protective against cancer. And if you ate these foods, then we probably, because authorities say, we could reduce cancer rates if people ate healthy by like 40% or something. I'm saying, even though they're agreeing that you could reduce cancer rates with diet, I'm saying the diets they're looking at to reduce cancer don't have the precision of nutritional excellence, while avoiding the other cancer promoters of a nutritarian diet. And I'm saying a nutritarian diet should be able to reduce cancer rates by 90, 95%, not by 40 or 50%, right? Because obviously people are exposed to things like cigarette smoke, or work in chemical factories, or exposed to asbestos or other causes of cancer. But even with people who have exposures to factors that cause cancer, like pollutants, still reduce their chance of those things causing cancer when they have a high phytochemical exposure. So here's an example of women who had breast cancer in a study. And they followed these women with a diagnosis of breast cancer for 10 years. And those that had the highest consumption of lignin had a 71% reduced risk of death over that 10-year period. What? That's a third of a milligram of lignin. Look, in the highest quartile. We're talking about, that's a third of 1 milligram. Us nutritarians eat 30 milligrams of lignin. They have a third of 1 milligram. A tablespoon of ground flax seeds is over 20 milligrams of lignin a day, right? So that's just a little tiny bit, and it still reduced risk of cancer by 71%. I guess what I'm saying here is that don't wait till you have cancer to do this. But even when you did wait to have cancer, and don't eat a third of a milligram, Americans eat that's like 3 times as much the average American is eating, but it's still 300 times less than what we're eating, as nutritarians are eating. That's still not going to give you, and it still protects against cancer. Even a little bit of mushrooms is protective against cancer. Even a little bit of onion or garlic is protective against cancer. Even a little bit of flaxseed and cruciferous vegetables or sprouts are protective against cancer. Certainly, you got to be crazy not to even eat a little bit of it. People tell me, oh, I hate mushrooms. And I'll say, well, take the mushroom supplements in powdered form, eat a little bit of mushrooms, mix it in the food, mix it into the soup, put it in the, you don't even know it's there. And at least eat a little bit of it. Don't have none of it. You're crazy if you don't eat these foods. So the prescription, to review what we covered so far, is that let's talk about the prescription here of what I'm telling you to eat. Are you a nutritarian or you're not? Do you eat at least a half a cup of beans a day on top of your salad and a vegetable bean soup with your lunch, with your salad and your soup for lunch? Do you eat a salad every day with raw vegetables, with a mixture of different types of raw vegetables? Do you eat at least 3 fresh fruits a day, and which includes berries? You know, keep in mind the Women's Healthy Eating and Living study, the WHEAL study. Yes, it showed that vegetables showed the most protection against cancer, that people who ate the most vegetables had the lowest cancer rates. That's what it showed. It showed that green cruciferous vegetables have the most protection against genetic defects that cause cancer, like the genes that increase risk of breast cancer, that those who ate green cruciferous vegetables suppress those genes the most. The cruciferous vegetables are most protective, suppressing genetic tendency towards cancer, yes. But it also showed that people who ate vegetables plus fruit lived longer and had more cancer benefits than just the vegetables alone. It reinforced this concept of nutritional diversity. We want to eat a wide variety of foods, and restricting our diet to just vegetables and not including berries and fruit is not ideal. And taking our diet and making it low fat and taking out the nuts and seeds is not ideal. And taking it, in other words, the more we restrict our diet, we're trying to get a wide assortment of plant fibers and different types of plants. And you want to eat at least 1.5 ounces of nuts and seeds a day. That's a goal of about at least 1/2 ounce with each meal. Now I'm saying at least. I'm not saying that I eat 1/2 cup of beans a day. I may have days where I eat a cup of beans. I'm saying at least 1/2 ounce of nuts and seeds with each meal to facilitate the absorption of the phytonutrients that protect against cancer, because that 1/2 ounce increases the absorption of those anti-cancer nutrients by 50-fold compared to having the salad or the vegetables with no fat in the meal, right? But it doesn't mean that some meals I'm eating 1 ounce or more because maybe I did a lot of exercise today. Maybe I'm skiing or half the day, or maybe I'm going to the gym and I want more calories. So I'm saying at least 1/2 ounce, and I'll explain why. We'll show you why, is because in the studies on nut and seed consumption, the longest lifespans and the most protection against all-cause mortality and the most protection against cardiovascular death occurred in people eating at least 1/2 ounce, at least 1.5 ounces of nuts a day. At least one large salad a day. Do you pay attention to eating one large salad a day and chew it really well with maybe sprouts on top and some cruciferous greens like arugula added to it? Do you do that every day? Do you use a nut and seed dressing on the top to facilitate absorption, and to use some nuts and seeds that have omega-3 fatty acids like walnuts or hemp seeds or flax seeds or chia seeds? Remember what I was just saying here? I'm saying that the nuts and seeds that have these lignans and powerful polyphenols that prevent cancer, and sterols and stanols that prevent cancer, all these properties that nuts and seeds have to prevent cancer and extend lifespan, the ones that are highest in omega-3 are flax. The same ones that are high in these anti-cancer effects also are highest in omega-3, which are flax seeds. Chia seeds are high in lignans and polyphenols and all these sterols and stanols that protect cancer, but they're also high in omega-3 fatty acids that protect the heart. Because the ALA, the alpha-linolenic acid, from these omega-3 containing nuts and seeds, there are 4 of them, right? Flax, chia, hemp, and walnuts. Flax, chia, hemp, and walnuts. Are you eating those every day? You're getting the lignans and the omega-3. And I'm saying those 4, you should strive for those 4 being half your nut and seed intake. Sure, you can eat the other half and eat whatever you want. Pistachios, filberts, pecans, Brazil nuts, right? Whatever it is you want to eat. But at least try to strive to half of these of your nut and seed, get your body what it needs for those omega-3 fats that protect the heart, because we know that low-fat diets don't offer as much protection compared to diets that have adequate amount of omega-3 fatty acids, including the short-chain omega-3 fatty acids, ALA, in those 4 foods I just mentioned, right? Have more protection against cardiac arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, and leads to dramatic reduction in cardiovascular death. Do you have some steamed or wok greens every day? Do you have some mushrooms predominantly cooked and some onions predominantly raw every day? Are you doing this daily? Are you following this prescription? I hope you are, and I hope you're proud of what you're doing, because it's incredibly protective. So my first principle of the Nutritarian diet is represented by these equation, H=N/C, which means the quality of your later life, your healthy life expectancy, is proportional to the nutritional bang per calorie you take through your life. the amount, diversity of these healthy foods you eat. The more healthy foods you eat, the healthier you are, right? So this is not, it's not just eating whole food, plant food diet. You can eat a macrobiotic diet, just eat rice all day. That is not a longevity promoting diet. It might be better than a standard American diet, right? But it's not a maximizing human longevity. We're trying to maximize human longevity. We want to use nutritional science to have a more diversity and concentration of antioxidants and phytonutrients in every cell in your body. So I want you to memorize these 5 words, right? The most proven methodology to slow aging, or the only proven methodology to slow aging. And here are the 5 words: moderate caloric restriction in the context of micronutrient excellence, which means getting your full level of micronutrient adequacy in your caloric pie. And don't eat excess calories and don't waste your caloric consumption eating things that have no nutrients. When you eat more white bread and more oil and more processed foods and even animal products, because I'm saying animal products and processed foods both are not rich in micronutrients and fibers and substances that fight off cancer. And the more you take space in your pie of calories that you're going to consume each day and waste those calories on white bread and white rice, or even brown rice for that matter, and chicken and oil, the more you put things that are not phytonutrient rich, the less space you have in your diet to eat these protective foods. So the determinants of longevity have to do with the concentration of phytonutrients in your cells and the level of toxins in the cells, right? So there's 2 types of toxins. There's waste products produced by the body called endogenous wastes, and there's waste products we get exposed to the external environment called exogenous wastes. We want to minimize our exposure to chemicals and toxins, which we can't totally eliminate. We want to minimize that. But at the same time, the only way to keep those levels of toxins down is to flood the body with high levels of phytonutrients, because I'm explaining to you that these nutrients like ergothioneine and isothiocyanates and the organosulfide compounds in onions, these compounds from these foods and herbs and greens, and right, have the effect to enable the body to remove toxins from the cells. The higher your nutrient content in your cells, the lower your toxicity of your cells. The lower your nutrient content in the cells, the higher the toxicity of the cells. So you control your risk of which you're aging. And we're looking to do that with a low body fat percent, because body fat is toxic and body fat spews out pro-inflammatory substances. So as your body fat gets higher, you become more insulin resistant. And that's what that low IR means. The IR means insulin resistance. And the hallmark of all long-lived and healthy centenarians is that they're insulin sensitive, not insulin resistant. That means their body fat is low, and they don't need to make much insulin to keep their glucose in the favored range. So all overweight people are pre-diabetic, not the ones whose sugars have already started to rise. Even when their sugars are perfectly normal, they're still pre-diabetic, because if they're overweight, they're producing too much insulin, and too much insulin drives aging of the body and can drive cancer and starts the damage from diabetes occurring even before the sugars start to rise. Now, the glucose response, or the degree of insulin resistance you have, is proportional to the amount of body fat and the lipemic load of the meal. That combination greatly affects whether you're insulin resistant or not. I'm going to explain what I mean by that. The body fat, particularly when you have more saturated fat in the body, and when you eat saturated fats from animal products, then you have more saturated fat that distorts the function of the insulin receptor and makes it so the insulin become more insulin resistant. So this person on a keto diet, which is one of the most dangerous ways a person could eat, they're eating more animal products with saturated fat. They're distorting their insulin receptors and harming them. So when they eat a mango in the morning with their breakfast oatmeal or something, they say, look, I can't eat that stuff. My glucose shoots through the roof. My continuous glucose monitor shows my sugar went to 300 with the mango. Yeah, of course, because you've damaged your insulin receptors with all the animal products you're eating. And all those animal products you're eating made you create certain bacteria in the gut that feeds on those animal products, that creates pro-inflammatory compounds like TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, and P-cresyl sulfate that damage the insulin receptors and damage your kidney and damage your endothelial lining. You're creating all this damage, and you think you can't eat. So we're talking here, and you don't have a healthy biofilm that then slows that keeps your glucose response to the mango favorable. The point is that I'm making right here is that the fat on the body, the type of fat you eat, and the lipemic load of the meal, which means how much fat came into the bloodstream after that meal. When you have oil, any kind of oil poured on your food, including olive oil, that comes in about 40 to 50 calories a minute. You're getting a huge spike of fat in the blood. And the lipemic load, just like the glycemic load, refers to the glucose that's spiked in the bloodstream, which is the sugar in the bloodstream spiking is not beneficial to your health. And the fat spiking in the bloodstream is not beneficial to your health. And protein spiking in the bloodstream is not good to your health. The spike of the bloodstream, this caloric rush with modern foods, burgers and pizza and greasy food and fried foods and oil and everything, the spiking of calories in the bloodstream affects the brain and distorts the brain chemistry. And it turns people into have an addictive relationship with food going after, because the spike of nutrients and the spike of calories in the blood is brain stimulating and makes people become dopamine sensitive and craving. That's the form of craving. You have a salad and a bowl of soup for lunch with a couple of pieces of fruit, and you're not satisfied. You still got to have your caloric. You didn't put enough calories in the blood. Got to have like a candy bar or some ice cream or a double dipper cheese pizza or something. I don't know. Maybe they should make like, instead of these cheeseburgers with 2 burgers, they should put like a pizza with a burger and bacon and another cheese on top. So you have like the pizza is the burger, the bun is made out of pizza, and the burger is made out with bacon in the middle of the two. I could get rich on designing these dangerous foods. The more dangerous and the more cancer promoting you design it, the more people want to eat it, right? The more it's crazy, the more dangerous. Anyway, so we're talking here, I'm getting on a tangent, but we're talking here about oils give you a heightened lipemic load. And when you eat nuts and seeds as a source of fat in place of oil, it's walnuts, not walnut oil. It's sesame seeds, not sesame seed oil. Because when you eat the oil, you get this huge spike of fat in the bloodstream, which then makes the insulin more insulin resistant, and you have to produce more insulin to get the sugar out of the blood. So the oil in the food made the potato more dangerous. Did you get that? You have a worse glycemic response to the carbohydrate you ate because you ate oil in the same meal. But it's not just the oil in the meal, it's the fat on the body that's mixed in with that too, and the type of fats you have. So we're looking to, I always say to be healthy, there's no such thing as a healthy overweight people, impossible, because as their body fat for a female goes above 25% to 26%, 27%, 28%, 29%, as it goes up, right? So does their insulin resistance. The amount of their estrogen levels go up. Their inflammatory markers and the cytokines and lipokines go up. And immune suppression, they're diabetic. So their increased risk of death or morbidity and mortality from catching an infection. Higher risk of dying from pneumonia. Higher risk of getting, and they have lifespan shortening effects that can't be denied as fat increases on the body. Just like, doctors they have no ability and skills, motivational techniques and knowledge to be able to train people how to lose weight and keep it off for the rest of their life. So instead, they try to measure things that they could treat with a drug instead of telling the person to get the weight off and telling them how they should eat healthily. So instead, we're going to measure your cholesterol and treat that with a drug. Instead, we're going to measure your blood pressure and treat that with a drug. Instead, we're not going to solve the basic problems because the cholesterol's high because you have too much saturated body fat in your body and your visceral fat stores. They don't really deal with the problem because maybe that's more difficult for them to deal with. They don't have the knowledge and training to do so. And maybe it's more, you could say, difficult to get their feeling they don't have the skills to induce patient compliance. So they just write prescriptions, which just are permission slips so people keep abusing their body. So low body toxicity, low body fat percent. I mentioned women's body fat has to have normalcy, should be below 25%, and males should be below 15%. I'm not saying below 25% fat for a woman is ideal. It's probably ideal to be below 24 or 23%, but at least the minimum stage at which levels where we start to see abnormalities start to develop is typically as women get above 25% body fat. And then in addition to eating right and having high cellular density of nutrients, we want to have a favorable omega-3 index, which is measurable on a blood test, right? So one potential weakness of plant-based diets are people not paying attention to maintain a favorable omega-3 index, which is shown in scientific literature to be related to longer lifespan, better brain protection, larger brain size, less risk of dementia, and less risk of all-cause mortality with a higher, more favorable omega-3 index. That means that low body fat helps that, eating more omega-3 containing nuts and seeds help that, and taking some vegan or algae-based omega-3 supplements to adjust the dose to make sure to your diet and your body fat to make sure you maintain that index, usually above 6 or at least 5.5. So to review what you're learning already, what we're talking about here, we're talking about high nutrient intake in a favored caloric environment, right? So we're not overweight. It enhances cellular repair, reduces inflammation, silences abnormal genes, decreases toxins like free radicals, enhances DNA repair, and slows the metabolic rate, the rate at which we're aging. We want a slower metabolic rate, not a faster one. When you eat excess calories, you're aging yourself faster by a host of different mechanisms, but your body is a furnace. It's like running the engine at a higher rate. And when we eat less, when we eat the right amount of calories with lower body fats, we are a little colder in the wintertime because we have less fat as insulation and because our bodies are conserving calories more. We're not burning those extra calories off by increasing our metabolism. Let me say that one more time. That when I overeat calories, the body doesn't burn it, store all those extra calories as fat. When I overeat calories, part of those calories I didn't need is trying to be burned off by the body by increasing the metabolic rate of the body. Your body runs at a higher temperature, it raises thyroid function, and it increases the calories burned through respiration or breathing. So it tries to burn off the extra calories, which means it's aging faster. When we eat fewer calories, we age slower, we run colder, and that's another secret to prolonged lifespan is don't eat calories you don't need. Eat calories to maintain your muscle and your size and good health, and you know it's not healthy to become too thin, but certainly you have to have an idea what your favorite caloric window is and what your favorite body size is to keep yourself muscular and strong with at least a favorable body fat, a low enough body fat that's not going to impede your lifespan. So I'm dissuading people from using the term whole food plant-based. This is not a whole food plant-based diet. We're not advocating that because that's not descriptive enough of what a healthy diet is, right? Because you could eat like 80% of your diet could be potatoes. That's whole food plant-based, but you're not eating things you need to eat to live a long life, right? Your diet could be based on rice, and it could be still whole foods. And you're not eating the onions and the mushrooms and the green vegetables and all the different variety of foods you need to eat to have a long life. Your diet could be fruit-based. You could be eating 15 bananas a day. That's a whole food plant-based diet or like a fruitarian diet. But you're not going to have a prolonged lifespan because elderly people need more protein and you're putting in too much sugar and not enough protein in your diet. And we know that out of the 5 types of plant food, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, and intact whole grains, the only one deficient in protein, inadequate protein, is fruit. Now, if your diet is too high in fruit, you're not going to have an ideal protein level of plant-based protein that's going to carry you, but in your 80s and 90s to 100 years old, that's going to have you, otherwise you're not going to age well. And your diet's not corn-based. So this is more descriptive. It's more precision than just whole food plant-based. It's not that you say you're a vegan, you're plant-based. What does plant-based mean anyway? Based? Based? What does based mean? It means more than half, more than 60%, more than 70%, more than 80%. I'm not sure what it means, but the American diet is only 35% of calories from animal products. I guess some people consider that plant-based. People are using plant-based to mean anything. But I'm saying here that a diet based on science with nutritional precision to expose people to a wide assortment of plant fibers and protective plant-derived nutrients is not adequately represented by the term plant-based. That's why I'm using the term nutritarian, because it's more prescriptive. And I don't agree with people putting their name on a diet, like the Atkins diet or the Pritikin diet, put the name. It's not, none of us invented healthy eating. or invented, no, one of us is responsible or for telling that vegetables make you live longer. Everybody knows that. And there's thousands of studies, probably more than 10. I've reviewed personally, I've read more than 30,000 scientific studies on the subject. There are thousands of studies documenting this. No one person came to these ideas, right? We know that diets high in vegetables make people live longer, right? All right, let's go over here this idea of high protein and death, because one of the most striking findings of the last decade is that diets higher in animal protein lead to shorter lifespan. And this has now been corroborated in more than a dozen separate studies that have looked at people for decades and looked at hard endpoints like death and showed that people with the most animal products in their diet live the shortest lifespans. And people on keto diets have the most early life, had higher rates of early life deaths. That means deaths before the age of 70. So here's one study which had a 25 median year follow-up. We're talking about looking at people over many, many, many years to see the outcomes of how they eat, right? And the most early life deaths occurred with people with carbohydrate restriction on keto diets. And what's interesting is that how much corroborative evidence different researchers, different cohorts of people, different studies looking at the same thing, and they all show the same thing, that more animal protein made for more death, right? And here's some studies, here's some other studies showing different researchers, different names on the studies, not the same people just ringing the same data cohort to a different, and publishing another data set. It's all different data sets, all different researchers, all showing the same thing, that more animal protein made for shorter lifespans. Here's more studies on the same issue showing that the same patterns, every time you look at the same evidence with large numbers of people, you show more animal protein in the diet as it goes higher and higher. The dose-dependent relation leads to more death. And the most fascinating finding on these studies showed that more plant protein made for longer lifespans. I think a lot of people in the plant-based community recognize that more animal protein made for longer death. It's one of the reasons they're not eating it. But I don't think they realize that more plant protein made for longer lifespan. Soybeans, other beans are rich in protein. Nuts and seeds are rich in protein. Green vegetables are rich in protein, right? They didn't know that. I don't think the plant-based community sufficiently recognized that a plant-based diet could have inadequate fat and inadequate protein if it's not well designed. And that the inclusion of beans with nuts and seeds and vegetables gives you more protein adequacy. And I think the reason why these studies all showed more plant protein made for longer lifespan, besides the fact that protein bioavailability goes down with aging, and we need protein adequacy to keep IGF-1 from dropping too low, because we want IGF-1 lower to prevent cancer. But if we get protein inadequate, you don't just get muscle wasting and frailty, you also get your IGF-1 to drop too low, and that could lead to more frailty or less immune system function, right? So we're saying here that protein adequacy does matter, and that I think that one of the reasons why higher protein plant-based diets are linked to longer lifespan is because green vegetables, beans, and nuts and seeds have other factors, they're rich in protein. They're the 3 highest protein-containing plant foods. And when you eat them, you don't just get more protein, we get more other protective phytonutrients that make you live longer. So it looks like the highest protein plant foods make you live longer, and it may have something to do with getting protein adequacy and something else to do with the other beneficial nutrients to come along for the ride when you eat those high protein plant foods like green vegetables, beans, soybeans, and nuts and seeds. Now, animal source proteins, of course, drive IGF-1 too high, because remember that we talked about that caloric load, the calories flooding into the bloodstream so high. Well, now we're talking about protein flooding, exceedingly flooding the bloodstream too high. When we eat plant proteins, we get meat adequacy, but we don't get excess at one time. And the excess at one time of the fat leads to more fat storage right away from 5 minutes, from the lips to the hips in 5 minutes flat. But the excess protein, amino acids soaring in the blood, leads to more promotion of growth-promoting hormones like IGF-1 that in high levels is another ingredient in the witch's cauldron of cancer causation. put some sprinkle a little insulin on that, put a little estrogen in there too from the extra body fat, put a little IGF-1 in there, extra IGF-1 from the extra animal protein, and all of a sudden you got all these ripe ingredients to form a healthy environment for the growth of cancer cells, right? We're percolating the growth of cancer cells with the standard American diet. The diet been designed by Al-Qaeda to kill us, I say. Even that joke is not even updated anymore, but at least sounds good. All right, so in any case, reviewing here right now that animal protein can negatively affect gut bacteria to produce bacteria in the gut that now produce pro-inflammatory, cancer-promoting substances, irritants like TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, and P-cresyl sulfite, which doesn't just damage the kidney, it damages the whole body from too much. And of course, increases the kidney stones, gout, arthritis, and deficiency of phytochemicals and antioxidants that allow cancer cells to flourish. So to review here, let me just show this slide where you see that phytochemical exposure, regular exercise, and reducing caloric excess or empty calorie consumption activates those correct behaviors, activates longevity proteins like SIRT1 and AMP kinase, which then have powerful effects. All these things work together to stabilize our telomeres, stabilize our stem cells, slow aging of the body, reduce inflammation, and to allow your body to live to its natural age of around 100 years old. Whereas excessive calories, high glycemic carbohydrates, right, more sugar, honey, white flour, and animal protein, right, activates mTOR and other factors like we're talking about, other pro-inflammatory substances that lead to cell proliferation, cell growth, activate turning on cancer cells to promote cancer, ages the telomeres, destroys the stem cells, creates chronic oxidation, inflammation in your body, and dramatically shortens lifespan. So we know how we can control our epigenetic clock, right? We know we can control our aging clock. We have the answers because science supplies it. Now the question is, why aren't people doing it, right? Why is the science not being translated into action? I speak at plant-based conferences. I'm looking out in the audience and seeing that like 80% of the people are overweight and still eating oils and white flour and all kinds of garbage. They don't get it. And I want to make this clear about nuts and seeds and lifespan and say that now there's more than 50 corroborative studies, and there's nothing that shows more corroborative evidence compared to the inclusion of nuts and seeds in a diet and showing the amount of lifespan benefit you get from that. And in almost every study shows that it gives about a 40% reduction of cardiovascular mortality and about a 30% reduction of all-cause mortality when you eat nuts and seeds as your major source of fat. In the Seventh-day Adventist Health Study 2, which is such an important study because when we look at Seventh-day Adventists, they're generally not smokers and drinkers. They're encouraged to exercise. They don't eat much animal products, so they eat some animal products. They're generally a healthier cohort than the average Americans. So now if we looked at that healthier cohort of people who are largely taking better care of their health, and now we modulate their nut and seed intake, we can see clearly how unhealthy it is to cut nuts and seeds and to go to a low-fat diet. Even the Prevamid study showed that when they compared a low-fat diet to a diet that included olive oil, people did better with olive oil. It had some fat in it. But the longest-lived people in Prevamid were the people who were eating nuts and seeds at baseline and were then randomized to the group that were told to eat nuts and seeds. And even though olive oil was better than no fat or better than butter and better than a low-fat diet, right? But it wasn't better than nuts and seeds. I mean, there are studies that show that, we could make eggs look good by comparing it to a donut. The point is that the best type of fats for the body are nut and seed fats, which do not create that caloric rush, which create fat storage, and which also interfere with insulin resistance and glucose metabolism, right? So we want to get our fat from nuts and seeds, which feed the calories in the blood slowly and contain these sterols and stanols, these fat binders that suck oxidized fats out of the bloodstream. That's right, eating nuts and seeds lowers oxidized LDL, the bad actor that causes heart disease, because it pulls the sterols and stanols that hold on to the fat in nuts and seeds, that feed the fat gently into the body over hours as opposed to rushing it in, also suck fat from the bloodstream back into the digestive tract. it attracts those negative fats, the oxidized fats you want to get out of the body. So more oxidized fat in the stool if you eat nuts and seeds, so it's sucking out bad things. So we're talking about the Adventist Health Study, and the Adventist Health Study 2 cohort showed how beneficial nuts and seeds are. But I'm also saying there are 50 other studies that corroborate that with impeccable clarity, how beneficial it is, with the Physicians' Health, the Nurses' Health Study, the Iowans' Health Study. When we're talking about more than 50 other studies showing that using nuts and seeds as your primary source of fat is adding to people's lifespan. So what is a nutritarian diet? Let's go back and revisit that now that we've gone over a lot of these things. It's a plant-rich diet designed to optimize micronutrient exposure, paying attention to caloric load by avoiding empty calorie foods like processed foods, oils, and animal products, to keep calories favorable, to assure an optimal weight and a low body fat percent, and a high concentration of nutrients in your tissues, right? And this is a vegetable-based diet. It utilizes a wide assortment of plant foods, including intact grains, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, assuring exposure to a wide variety of bioactive compounds from plants, right? The opposite of a carnivore diet, which limits you, right? We're talking about having a large exposure to phytochemicals, instead of people committing suicide with food with these crazy diets they're on. Lots of ways you can lose weight. You could snort cocaine to lose weight too. But the point is not looking for short-term benefit. We're looking to where we're gonna be healthier when we're 90 or 100 years old, or even when we're 80. We want to live a long, healthy life. It's exposure. It's your whole life's exposure to salt that ages the interior lining of blood vessels and increases your propensity for having a rupture of blood vessel in your brain and having a hemorrhagic stroke, maybe dying in your sleep or being in a nursing home for the rest of your life crippled because you had that high exposure to salt your whole life. It's the exposure to the processed foods and the meats and your whole life, right? So we have to start working now, wherever you are, to expose yourself to these protective nutrients. And us nutritarians use that term G-bombs to help remind us to make sure we eat enough green vegetables every day, not just eating Ezekiel bread with nut butter on it. I'm making sure I eat enough broccoli and salad, and making sure I eat enough onion and put those things in, making sure I have enough vegetables each day. Particularly, I'm getting through all the different categories of G-bombs, and I'm recognizing that when we reduce animal products in our diet to such low levels or eliminate them completely, then there could potential risk from deficiencies or insufficiencies of B12, zinc, iodine, vitamin D, and EPA, DHA, which we're paying attention to that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different nutrients that may be somewhat lower on a plant-based diet to make sure we have micronutrient adequacy. Comprehensive micronutrient adequacy means make sure you're not too low in any nutrient that could shorten your lifespan. So we're using the judicious use of supplements, recognizing that excess use of supplements can cause harm. But even synthetic supplements like folic acid and vitamin A, acetyl and retinol palmitate, can still increase risk of cancer. But even too much of a good thing, like too much vitamin D or too much of nutrients, can also cause a problem. So we have to differentiate. We have to hit that sweet spot, right? Too low, too much, too little iodine is bad, and too much is bad. We got to hit that sweet spot right in the middle, because we can show you studies that show that this supplement is bad, but I can show you something that this supplement is good based on the dose being used, right? The dose, whether the dose was in that favored range or whether it was too much or too little. So we're looking to strive for excellent health, conservative use of supplements, more beans, more greens, more nuts and seeds in the diet, which dramatically lowers the glycemic load of our diet and improves diabetic and cardiovascular parameters. And what I'm saying here, that my 35 years of clinical practice with more than 20,000 patients, I have used this longevity benefiting diet to shown it to be most therapeutically effective as a disease reversal modality, so people can reverse heart disease, reverse diabetes, not be diabetic anymore, get rid of their high blood pressure drugs and not have a blood pressure medication anymore, recover from autoimmune disease, including multiple sclerosis and lupus and psoriasis and scleroderma, and people can make complete recoveries and not need asthma inhalers anymore, get rid of their asthma. Even seeing allergies like cat allergies and hay fever improve and resolve in a few years. And a high success rate with obesity and food addiction, because once your level of nutrients are high, and once you habituate to healthy eating, your cravings go down, the desire to overconsume calories lower, and you no longer have to be, and you can lose your food addictions with practice and time of eating healthy food. You'll stop craving the other foods, and the weight pours off you effortlessly till you reach your ideal weight, and then it kind of levels off, right? So what I'm saying here is that, yeah, you can eat healthier than the average American, like a low-fat vegan diet. Healthier, a flexitarian diet maybe is better than the average American diet. The Mediterranean diet is better than the average American diet, but they shouldn't be held as optimal. What I'm trying to do is create a dietary portfolio that's optimal, that people can hold as a pinnacle of what they're striving for. And you could choose to eat to the pinnacle diet to maximize human lifespan, or you could choose not to. That's up to you. But at least let's not be confused about this. It's clearly obvious by the preponderance of evidence that eating a diet with a wide variety of vegetables and including a wide variety of different plant foods in different colors makes for longer lifespan. So I'm saying here that it's not just about living longer, it's about having a high quality of life, maintaining our physical capacity and our emotional and mental capacity as we age, and really living life to enjoy our life into our later years. And that's why I wouldn't live any other way, because I feel that this is the way of living that can give us most pleasure in life, most enjoyment in life, and most peace in life, and not live with fear. I don't know how a person can enjoy their life when they're running back and forth to doctors, getting tested and prodded and taking pills and medications. And I just can't, that's just not an enjoyable to life. Living your life and really enjoying your life means protecting your health and putting the best quality food into your mouth each day. In other words, why would you self-destruct yourself? Why would a person destroy their own health? Why would a person consume substances that aren't good for them? And I'll tell you why, because they're addicts. And I'm not calling you an addict. I'm calling all Americans an addict because they've been trained to be food addicts because they've been fed addictive food substances at a young age. And that's the way they prefer to live and eat. And it takes time and dedication and perseverance and repetition and a good attitude. That means it takes robust emotional health to start to make good food choices that's going to protect your future. So I'm wishing you, of course, the best of luck and the best of success in achieving great health. A lot of this lecture came from my latest book, Eat for Life. And for those of you who need my care, I have a retreat in San Diego where people can come and visit me and spend a month here if they have a food addiction or have some problem where they really need to live it, to really be able to obtain this degree to be able to like it and live it and have the tools they need to do it in their own homes, which is not, and you guys can do this on your own too. And you can certainly read more of my materials or listen and also get my help if you need through the Dr. Fuhrman membership, if you want my particular individual guidance. But there's no longer an excuse for people having to be unhealthy and just let their bodies deteriorate with unhealthy eating. All right, I'm going to pause here. I'll show a couple of references of studies that myself and my associates have published on healthy eating and longer life, and I will open up the floor to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fuhrman. Really appreciate the information that you shared with us today. So, obviously, you shared all your information, so that's great. So, one of the comments in the chat is, no one's ever eaten like this kind of in the world. Why, or how would you explain, how would you respond to that kind of thought that throughout all of history, there's no culture or anything like that that's eaten like this?
Well, I mean, that's why we rely on science. And that's what we do. That's why I spent my life reviewing the world's scientific literature, reviewing 30,000 articles to see what dietary factors lead to longest life and most protection of disease, and what foods are so protected, so we could design a dietary portfolio with the best foods. And and we do have evidence that as people approach these same principles, more vegetables, more nuts and seeds, we're seeing that we have the studies on people that when they do these things, more onion, when they do all these things we're talking about, less animal products, they live longer. And we have those studies that show that this is true. Now, I do have my cohort of people that I've cared for in my practice over the last 30, 35 years, many of which that came to me in their 60s and 70s, who are now in 95 to 100 to over 100 years old, looking at this cohort of patients I've had that have adopted my recommendations, who are living a lifespan and in great health, and many of which had heart disease and medical problems back in there when they were younger, when they first came to me. So I've had a huge patient population and even people who've had cancer diagnoses who were given limited lifespan prognosis, who are now survived 20 years after their cancer diagnosis. So if anything, I'm saying that the dietary portfolio I'm talking about has shocked even me about with its potential to allow people to reverse their diseases and live a long lifespan. And we can't live long enough. That's what we do animal studies too. We're not going to each be alive 50 to 100 years from now. Now we have a large amount of people from this audience who now are living to their death. We can't witness those. But right now we have to use the science that we have that's available, right? And I'm saying that the science that we have available is overwhelming. And really, to deny it, there's something in the mind that's in denial because they don't want to eat vegetables, they don't want to eat healthy, they want to do what they want to do, they like to, and they're looking for rationalizations. But I'm thinking that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that there's usually some other factor going on when people want to deny the value of eating a healthy diet.
And what about people who've come later in life to this diet? How long can they extend their life?
Obviously, a person who has an advanced cancer, and they're going to as you get closer to death, the limitations are going to become greater. But I've seen people with cancer, live a long life and never have cancer recurrence or reverse their. I've seen men with prostate cancer have it go away completely, and I've seen women with breast cancer have it disappear. Shockingly, I've seen it. So, but in any case, I give an example of a person, John Pelikowski, who just passed away. He lived about 100 years old. He came to me when he was about 70 years old with a triple vessel disease in his heart, and his cardiologist told me he needed stent placement. I talked him into refusing the stents and instead going on the diet. He reversed his cardiovascular illness, so his stress test normalized. His physician, his cardiologist, was so impressed. He said, "I never saw a patient, all of a sudden he didn't need stents anymore, but I may bring him up because as he got older, he didn't need blood pressure medications anymore either. Blood pressure went away, didn't raise with aging, and then he lived with no cardiovascular issues to the later part of 99 years. So the point I'm making here is that many of my patients that I used to care for when they were 60, 75, and 80 have had long lifespans, surprising me, because I would think that the first half of their life that they lived unhealthy would have precluded them from living that long, and it did not. When my mother came here to California when she was 90, she was on 3 blood pressure medications, and her creatinine was high. She already had some degree of kidney insufficiency. And since living next to the retreat and eating the food that I'm feeding her now instead of the food that she was eating with her husband at home who passed away, her creatinine came back to normal. And now that she's 97, her kidney is normal. And now she doesn't need blood pressure medications anymore. So even at the age of 90 to 97, she improved her health, eating better. So yeah, I've seen that tremendous improvement in individuals who make necessary changes. It's just been so incredibly rewarding.
That's great to hear. So you mentioned about that patient's blood pressure not raising as they got older. What are some of the common misconceptions that Americans and people in general have with regard to what can expect as they age?
Well, one of the common misconceptions has to do with salt, because salt is it's your lifetime exposure to sodium that weakens the anterior lining of blood vessels. And people think, oh, well, I should take some electrolytes, especially when I exercise and I sweat. Then get a cramp in my leg from losing electrolytes. I'll take some Gatorade or something, right? So that's a common misconception because when you're on a high salt diet, you're sweating out a lot of salt and you're urinating out of salt when you urinate. When you're on a low sodium diet, your body habituates to it and your sweat has no sodium in it anymore. It's just water and you stop urinating out sodium. So when you eat less salt, you eliminate less salt. And the body has no ability to urinate out salt without taking other minerals with it, like potassium and manganese and magnesium. In other words, the body has to remove multiple electrolytes, bicarbonates. When you're trying to get out all the extra salt, you're losing a lot of other nutrients in the process. And then, yes, you can get a cramp in your leg and you can maybe need electrolyte attention. But us nutritarians who aren't salting our food can sweat and can exercise and go for a 10-mile run or play tennis for hours or play basketball in the heat and sweat. And we're not going to get cramped up. We can just replace our fluid with water. We don't need electrolyte drinks because we're not sweating and urinating out sodium and other our electrolytes. So it's a common, and people think, oh, it's a healthy salt. It's like a natural salt. That is just all misconception. It's marketing. And I'm saying that the amount of sodium that's best for us is the amount of sodium that's found in natural foods. And we don't need extra salt over and above what's on the food. And when we do that to too much of a degree, then we shorten our lifespan. And a leading cause of cardiovascular death worldwide is increased consumption of sodium.
And what about misconceptions as you get old, you can expect your blood pressure to go up. You can expect, like, it's a natural state that your blood pressure is going to go up, or a natural state that you're going to lose muscle, or a natural state that your bones are going to become fragile, and that aren't actually true if they eat healthy and live a healthy lifestyle.
Right. I think that we're brainwashed to think that you go to doctors and people think, oh, what you eat has nothing to do with cancer. It's all genetics. And I got older. I can't, my blood pressure's up. Doctors will say, you got to take these drugs the rest of your life. It's your age, because everybody else on your age is taking medication. And I'm saying that those are myths because we see that not only in my people who follow this program don't need drugs for high blood pressure, but look at the studies on the Camel Indians in Brazil, and they're isolated from civilization, don't salt their food. And we look at even the Catawba Island study. Any population that we study that eats more natural foods, that doesn't salt their food, we don't see blood pressures rise with aging. We see the most elderly members of populations with the same blood pressure as children, and we see almost non-existent cardiovascular deaths. The cardiovascular death is still the number one cause of death in adult Americans. About 30,000 women die each year of breast cancer, and about 400,000 people die of cardiovascular disease, more than 10 times the amount, right? So we're talking here about all the things people are doing wrong to shorten their lifespan, and they won't give it up. And they're looking for, and unfortunately, there's too much marketing to people to market substances that people would like to eat and want to eat. They want to market special salts, or how people know how popular unhealthy diets are, that people just want to do what they want to do. We're not going to affect the whole population to live this healthfully, but at least let's give people the opportunity to make a choice for themselves. What I've always said is, if you don't want to live this healthfully, that's your right and that's your choice, but at least you deserve to get clean and unbiased and accurate information. So now that you could at least make a choice based on facts, whether you want to do it or not. If I gave you the wrong information, then you at least you weren't even given a choice. You go to a regular doctor, he's just telling you to take drugs the rest of your life. He's not even giving the option of trying to live longer or protect yourself without the medication. They don't even make it think that the person doesn't even think it's possible, right? So the first thing to do is let's get as many people as we can to understand and to be consistent in what should be held up as the ideal way people should eat to prolong lifespan. And then you could decide to do it or not, based on,
Great. You mentioned magnesium, and magnesium has become very popular as a supplement. Everyone's saying, "Oh, you're magnesium deficient," and it cures everything. What are your thoughts on supplementing with magnesium? And what would people, if they do supplement, what would they expect to experience?
Well, don't forget, you're supplementing people who are magnesium deficient when eating processed foods and animal products. The minute you're eating beans and nuts and vegetables, you're not magnesium deficient. So the benefits of magnesium supplementation in a person eating so healthfully is almost nothing, whereas where the benefits might be some benefit in a person who's deficient in it. Any nutrient I give you gives you a benefit if you're deficient, and if you're not deficient, you're really not getting a benefit. Like if you have adequate vitamin D from getting enough sun, taking more vitamin D that you didn't need is not going to make you healthier. You already got, unless you have a level that's too low. You know what I mean? So it's the extra stuff you don't need to take if you're already adequate. It's what you're low in that you need to take that's going to help you. So magnesium citrate can be used as a laxative for people who can't move their or are constipated from all the meat they're eating or something. Magnesium glycinate is better absorbed for people who need help with their sleep because their diet's low in magnesium. But I'd rather people not have to resort to those type of things. I'd rather them just eat healthfully, need a diet that's magnesium adequate, you know?
And thoughts on iodine supplementation?
Iodine is higher in seafood and there's some iodine in plant foods near the coast, but you are at risk of having suboptimal levels of iodine when you eat and particularly we're eating no iodinated salt either, and no seafood. So I'm recommending people take a low dose of iodine, which is the RDI of 150 micrograms a day. I don't recommend people take large doses of iodine because that could also be toxic and can suppress thyroid function. Low amounts, too low, can suppress thyroid. So we're taking a moderate amount commensurate with the amount advised by the RDI, by the kind of like middle of the scientific road. You don't have to take huge amounts of iodine, which can be dangerous. But there are internet groups and people pushing high amounts of iodine, which are dangerous. And I'm a little bit concerned about those people getting a megaphone and being exposed to the population who doesn't know about that their information they're giving is not accurate and could be potentially dangerous or harmful. There's a lot of people pushing various viewpoints, such as high iodine intake, which is not based on an adequate review of all the science.
You mentioned eating cooked mushrooms as part of the G bombs. What about eating raw mushrooms?
I don't usually recommend people eat the azacaris type of mushroom raw, and that's white button mushroom and cremini and brown mushroom and portobello mushrooms. They're all the same family of mushroom, and they're high in a irritant or a mild carcinogen called agaritine, which blows off when you cook it mostly. So you're better off eating cooked mushrooms and also, so washing and cooking the mushrooms is better for most mushrooms, but there are some mushrooms that you can eat more that are not high agaritine containing mushrooms. So I'd rather people take their dehydrated mushroom powders, or dehydrated mushrooms could be raw, and they could have some degree of, if they like raw mushroom, they could use small amounts, but I wouldn't use regular mushrooms too much in the diet raw, mostly eat them cooked.
And what about mushroom coffee? How's that?
That's good. Mostly those mushroom teas have mixed mushroom extracts that are not that are actually helpful.
And what about regular coffee? Is that good for you? Is it not good for you? I've heard conflicting information during the conference.
I was on a panel and everybody was saying how good coffee was for them. I didn't even say anything. I don't want to just disagree too much, but I don't really agree with coffee being something that people should take because just because coffee has bioflavonoids and has some beneficial compounds in it doesn't mean people need to eat coffee to get those compounds. You can get those compounds from other beans and other things you're eating even more so, right? There's nothing magical in coffee that gives us that benefit. It's just demonstrative of how the American diet is so restrictive in polyphenols that even drinking coffee shows a benefit. It shows you how bad their diet is if that coffee is going to benefit them. Take a healthy person, they're not going to. But in any case, the caffeine in coffee is still a stimulant, it's still addictive, and it still enables people to get by with less sleep. In other words, it can interfere with sleep. But if I'm not getting enough sleep, I can drink coffee to keep myself alert. If I didn't have coffee, I'd have to get enough sleep to keep alert. I'm saying that coffee enables people not to sleep as much as they need to sleep. And they should be instinctually connected with getting as much rest and sleep as they need, not using coffee to cover that up. So I am not an advocate of coffee, nor do I think it's one of the most dangerous things people can do. There's plenty millions of things that are more harmful, so I don't want to make a big fuss about it. But I don't advocate it as a health food because even though the scientific studies are, some studies show some beneficial effects, it's still not going to, it still has negative effects. And particularly when people use higher amounts of it, and then they become more caffeine addicted. And then they're withdrawing from caffeine with caffeine headaches, and they're using food to deal with their caffeine headaches because they're eating more food to deal with or drinking more coffee. And then so it generally doesn't lead to a person being more um, focused on eating the right food. They are now having to eat things to make them brain feel better from withdrawal symptoms, and it can just sometimes discombobulate their instinctual need drive for hunger or their instinctual need for sleep. And I'm therefore more cautious about recommending that.
And are you familiar with Dr. Hellman during the conference said, and also Dr. Daniel Amen talked about outside of the conference, that it reduces blood flow somewhere between 27 to 30% to the brain. Are you familiar with that at all?
That sounds like an exaggeration, but we know that it affects the brain in various ways. And like anything else, as you put certain compounds in the brains become more resistant to those compounds, and you're changing brain chemistry over time. So I'm not sure about the accuracy of that statement. It sounds like an exaggeration, but in general, it doesn't, there's obviously some negative impact, plus the fact that coffee is a cooked bean and roasted. You're eating a roasted product. It's like comparing black tea to green tea. When you roast something, you form more acrylamides, and acrylamides are not increase the body's production of advanced glycation end products. So it's to me, I think it's of the so if they're saying not to drink coffee for that reason, then I guess
Yeah.
I'm saying okay, good. I'm agreeing with another reason not to drink coffee, but it does sound like a little bit of an exaggeration.
And what are your thoughts on Dr. Gundry's plant paradox with regard to the lectins?
Mostly I'm thinking that lectins are a beneficial substance that makes people live longer. And just like lignans make you live longer, the foods that are high in lignans, the plant foods and beans are high in lectins, and they're the foods most linked to increased longevity. The only point Dr. Gundry makes that has any value is the fact that you need to thoroughly cook beans. Because when you eat like red kidney beans and azuki beans and other those and black beans, if you don't cook them adequately, the lectins could have toxic effects. But that doesn't really apply to us because we generally are not, we're either sprouting beans or we're cooking them. We're not eating. So it's distortion of science to pick a niche to sell people an idea. So lectins are healthful, not harmful unless you're eating bean lectins that are agglutinins that are undercooked. So we shouldn't go to a conference and they're serving us beans if they're hard and chewy and not cooked enough. Don't eat them, right? Make sure beans are adequately cooked. It's the only valuable thing that Dr. Gundry contributes to the conversation.
And what is it in green vegetables that maximizes their anti-cancer benefit?
Um, well, don't forget, I'm saying that each piece of broccoli has 1,000 different nutrients in it. And even the sulforaphane in broccoli, which is an isothiocyanate or ITC, which has been shown to have powerful anti-cancer effects, even that is just one of numerous ITCs. And we isolate one ITC and take it into a pill, like they do on certain, like people are taking indole 3-carbinol pills, thinking it's going to prevent cancer. You're not going to get the same effects from getting the full spectrum of isothiocyanates from eating the real food. People want to turn it into a pill. It's not going to have the same benefits. It's like taking beta carotene pills instead of eating the whole symphony of different carotenoids. People are taking that AREDS 2 with macular degeneration given by their eye doctors. It's not as effective as eating a diet that's rich in various of the full assortment of carotenoids that you get from a Nutritarian diet. So you can't replicate what a good diet is going to give you by taking that isolated substance. But what I'm saying is that a broccoli has more than 800 different nutrients in it, and most of them aren't even been named or identified yet. So yes, it contains a lot of various antioxidant materials, a lot of different bioflavonoids and polyphenols, and a lot of different types of isothiocyanates, and a little different types of carotenoids in the lutein family. There's just a lot of different compounds that work synergistically to enable our body to have optimal immune function.
Does organic matter?
Yes, we eat a lot of organic matter. That was a joke.
Thank you. So organic. So and why does organic matter? Eating organic food matter.
Right. Um, Well, look, I mean, we all understand the concept that we're trying to increase our nutrient exposure and decrease our exposure to toxic substances. I mean, that just makes common sense, right? And you can sometimes eat food that's not organic, that has a low pesticide residue, or it's maybe even hardly any, and you could eat some non-organic food that has a much higher pesticide residue on it, And so we don't even know when you're eating a head of cabbage, if it's at the end of the row where the machine dumped more chemicals on it, or if it's in the middle of the row where there was hardly even sprayed. So it's sometimes hard to know. Even the individual foods could have different levels of chemical exposure on them. And we know that pesticide exposure hurts the workers working with pesticides. They have higher rates of lymphoma and soft tissue leukemia and soft tissue lymphomas. And so we're by eating organic, we're protecting our environment, we're protecting our soils, we're protecting the workers that are working with environment, that are working in the farming industry. And we're also most likely protecting ourselves, reducing our overall exposure to poison, to chemical substances the body has to deal with, right? So I try to eat a diet that's largely organic, and even, I prefer to have, regenerative organic agriculture where people are using really good soil and not even commercial organic. So we're trying to use the best food that we can, and I am recommending people also, if they can, garden, compost, and sprout, you know, do all those things. And if you can, grow some fruit trees in your garden too. Have a kumquat tree and a fig tree too, do whatever you can. I think there's something emotionally satisfying about growing your own food. It connects you to nature in a way that I think has beneficial effects to your emotional health and well-being. I know I get a lot of personal pleasure from eating things I grew myself.
I agree. Um, what are the most common nutrient deficiencies in the standard American diet, and what are the most common nutrient deficiencies in I want to call it a whole plant diet?
Well, I did say in this presentation that the common deficiencies for people who are eating vegan or plant food, or mostly plants, or hardly any animal products or no animal products, that those deficiencies are B12, zinc, iodine, could be D, but not if you got enough sun, and EPA and DHA, which people commonly call fish oil or have used as fish oil, but now we make them from you can get it from plant-based sources like the algae source, right? So those are the most common potential deficiencies, which are easy to remedy. And people on vegan diets need to take higher doses of B12 than a person because they are not absorbing, they're not getting a little bit with each meal, they're taking it in one pill, so they need a higher dose. So B12 is the thing to be most concerned about, but taking extra zinc, because we don't absorb zinc that as well because the phytates bind zinc in the diet. We don't get as great a zinc absorption as we do from animal products. And especially if we're not eating seafood, we're not getting as much zinc. And so zinc is something to pay attention to because it's been shown to reduce cancer rates and prevent dementia and have better effects on enhancing longevity when you take a little extra zinc in your diet if you're on a plant-based diet. So those are the main ones. On a conventional diet, you're missing too many thousands of nutrients. You're broad spectrum phytochemical deficient all the carotenoids, including lutein, lycopene, cryptoxanthine, xanthine, all those. You're fiber deficient. You're deficient in all the antioxidant nutrients. So particularly you're deficient in vitamin E but the main thing is that you might be getting enough certain vitamins and minerals, but you're not getting the antioxidants and the broad spectrum of phytonutrients that arms the immune system to defend against cancer. And like we said before, it's the wide variety of these phytochemical nutrients that show the most ability to extend human lifespan. That means the variety of different plants you eat. of different, including different types within each category, different types of grain, different types of green vegetables, different types of non-green vegetables, including tomatoes, eggplant, and you know, and peppers and cauliflower. In other words, even eating things that are different colors. So we're trying to get as much variety of plants in our diet as we can.
I've heard you speak in the past on toxic hunger. Can you explain what toxic hunger is?
Yes, toxic hunger means that when your body has when you're not eating healthfully enough, and then you digest a meal, when you finish digesting that meal, which could be 2 or 3 hours after you finished eating, the liver is now, instead of storing calories you just ate, the liver now becomes more actively involved in detoxification and produce and dumps more toxic waste in the bloodstream for removal by the kidney. And people start to feel agitated and fatigued by that. So they feel so-called hypoglycemic when they're not when their glucose is low, because the hypoglycemic part of the digestive curve of the anabolic and catabolic digestive cycle is when the body is in a heightened mode of detoxification. So people who don't eat healthfully feel more agitated and tired when they're not constantly digesting food all the time. So the unhealthy diet and insufficient nutrients makes them desire to eat more calories because they don't feel comfortable in the non-digestive state, which is a heightened stage of detox. So I call that toxic hunger because it's not real hunger. You didn't really utilize the calories you just ate yet, and you're already going to eat again. You didn't even burn off those calories you just ate, and you're already eating again because you don't feel well now. So most people mistakenly think that toxic hunger, like headaches and stomach fluttering and cramping and fatigue, they think they're symptoms of hunger. And I'm explaining that those are symptoms of detoxing from their unhealthy diet, which go away when they eat healthfully for a long enough period of time. And then they can be in tune with and in touch with true hunger, which is felt in the lower part of your neck, upper part of your chest, which directs you to the right amount of food, not the wrong amount of food. Toxic hunger is a cause of overeating.
And with regard to detoxing, when someone goes from an unhealthy diet to a nutritarian diet, what kind of detoxing effects might they expect?
They could have fatigue, headaches, indigestion, flu-like, feeling ill for a few days. So the worse the person's diet is, or if they're even having fast food and alcohol or fried foods, the more unusually sickly they feel when they stop all those bad habits. They start eating salad and vegetable bean soup and some fruit, and they're going to start to withdraw from the negative effects of their diet, have more toxic hunger, but have more symptoms in general, and could even have a low-grade fever and feel flu-like. So yes, detox is not comfortable, but feeling ill means you're getting better. When you stop poisons, you temporarily feel worse before you feel better. And people have to be able to recognize that they may need to go through 3 to 5 days of feeling worse before they start to feel better when they shift to a healthy diet. And sometimes there's even a secondary detox crisis that occurs once the body gets more nutrients in its tissues, and the person might feel worse a month later, and that just may take another couple of days to get over. But keep in mind that sometimes a headache is something that's good that's happening to you. It's not something bad. Your body is flushing something noxious out of the brain. And instead of taking a drug to push it back in, let the body finish its work and let the stuff come out. And don't take a drug, just rest, put an ice pack on your head, eat right, and try to sleep and see if your body can resolve this naturally. Sometimes it's important to do nothing intelligently and just not try to suppress symptoms with drugs. Too much people in America have this drug mentality and symptom mentality, and they go to doctors, alternative practitioners, naturopaths, or any kind of herbalist, and they're looking for a pill to take away their symptoms instead of trying to change their life and let the symptoms resolve naturally without any therapeutic intervention.
So you had a slide on animal food source protein versus plant source protein, and you mentioned uric acid and gout. What about somebody who doesn't drink a tremendous amount of alcohol and is on a whole food plant-based diet um, that has high uric acid and bouts of gout?
Well, we could look at what the issues may be. Maybe they still need to lose more weight. Maybe there's too much uric, maybe they're still overweight, but there might be some individuals who have some genetic defect, that could cause an unusual. So some things can occur even when people are eating healthfully. There might have been from defect from eating unhealthily for so long that could take a longer time to resolve, or it could be some genetic defect that may have to be addressed, but something should be looked into. Let's follow it and see whether it's coming down with healthy eating, and whether the uric acid is decreasing to a more favorable range over time, or whether this person needs some intervention with a medication.
Thank you. And what is what is the best way to clean fruits and vegetables from all the toxins that are on them?
That's also a good question. I think what we like lately, I think people are just using what's that? That dish detergent, like this dish cleaner.
Okay.
What's that?
Well, I know some people. I've heard some people talk about hydrogen peroxide to
Yeah,
clean.
but not hydrogen peroxide, but we just use I'm blanking out on the term on what we use. That's like a little that white thing in the kitchen. You can put it in the water to clean things with. Um, anyway,
The detergent?
no, it's like I don't know. Anyway, so
Well, if it comes to mind, you can.
I'm sorry, I
No,
forgot to
no worries.
put a
No
little
worries.
bit in the water and you can clean it. But then also you have to unclean it again and rinse it off. Even if you're putting like vegetables in salt water to get some bugs off or something, you still should take it out and clean it in regular water. And you do that when you use um, any of these natural cleaners in there.
And you talked about nuts and seeds. How about avocados? How much avocado can someone have in a day?
Well, depends on their caloric window. In other words, just think about this for a minute. Some people need a lot more calories than others. What if you're a 6'8" professional basketball player? You're gonna have to need a lot more calories. So what about if you're a 5 foot person, 5 foot woman who weighs 100 pounds? You need much less calories. Your caloric window is proportional to your size of your body and your musculoskeletal mass, right? So a person who's looking to lose weight, I think that the nuts and seeds have more beneficial effects. So they should eat mostly nuts and seeds, their source of fat, because they're keeping their caloric window lower, and only have a little bit of avocado, not more than maybe a half an avocado a day. But a person who's bigger and needs more calories and already eating 6 ounces of nuts a day and still needs more calories, why they can eat more avocado. So I think that could be adjusted to a person's individual needs, even though I do utilize avocado and think it's a healthy food. I don't think it should be used instead of nuts and seeds. It should be used in addition to them because they're still adding nutritional variety and still very good for you. So we're using avocado. Yes, baking powder. Somebody said in the chat box, we're
Okay.
using baking powder to wash the food in. What's the other term for baking powder? I think it's called, there's another like scientific term for it.
Oh, by sodium carbonate?
Yeah, I think it's called bic sodium bicarb or something. I forgot.
Yeah, sodium bicarbonate.
Sodium bicarbonate, that's the word I forgot. Yeah. It's baking powder, baking soda. Yeah, that's what it is. Baking soda. Okay, thank you. Thank you for contributing that. So yeah, talking about avocado, it's a relatively healthy food, but people still have to not overeat food, not overeat calories. And we know that when people are overweight and losing weight, right, that when they really eat healthfully, they're losing about 2 pounds a week or more. And if they're eating the right foods, their weight is coming off them. And so we see some people eating healthfully and still overeating. And if they're not losing weight on a healthy diet, then they have to modulate that downward a bit, right? So each person has to be the best scientist, artist of their own self and of their own body's needs. And they have to judge how much of that they can eat without sabotaging their ideal weight, right? And this is true with nuts and seeds too. You can't just eat an unlimited amount of them. For people who are overweight, I'm giving a half an ounce with each meal or an ounce and a half a day. And people who are not overweight, I'm giving more nuts and seeds than that. But it's possible there are certain individuals who could be snacking on them, eating them when they're not hungry, eating them recreationally, and nuts and seeds are causing them to maintain too much body fat. And in that case, they're no longer a favorable food, but something they're using to eat too many calories from. So as long as you're not overeating on that, I think all these things are okay.
Are there any good tips and tricks to help people avoid overeating?
Yes. Don't eat between meals. Don't snack. You get enough calories with 3 meals a day. And the second most important trick is eat all your calories before 6 o'clock at night. If you're eating 3 meals a day and you're eating all your calories before 6 o'clock at night, that means you're generally eating breakfast 7 to 8, lunch about noon, and dinner about 5. And then no calories should come into your mouth past 5:30. So that's when, so if we do that, and, if you want to feel like enjoying eating lunch, you can't overeat at breakfast. You're not going to be hungry at 12 for lunch. If you're eating dinner at 5, only, 4.5 hours later, if you ate too much at lunch, you're not going to be hungry for dinner. So the trick is to have a big caloric window of no food, no calories coming in between the end of dinner and the start of breakfast. So don't overeat at dinner time is the way you don't stuff yourself and don't eat till fullness at dinner. You want to go to bed on an empty stomach because sleeping while you're not digesting food is the hack that makes you live longer and put you in better health.
So it sounds a little like intermittent fasting. So what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting?
Yes, or you could call it time restricted eating, right? So it means that we can say that time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, where you skip breakfast and expend your non-eating window by eating a late lunch, is not recommended. That does not lead to a longer lifespan because those people are eating later at night and they're just eating a later breakfast. The type of intermittent fasting or time restricted eating that's most conducive to longer life is when you eat an earlier and lighter dinner and you eat breakfast at a normal time. So you're expanding your non-caloric window when you're sleeping by eating an earlier dinner and a lighter dinner, as opposed to skipping breakfast. So
Great.
that's the type I'm recommending.
Thank you. So many of us have loved ones and people we care about that are not eating the ideal diet. And we struggle to communicate to them in a way that I guess inspires them. Is there anything that you've learned over your years of communicating this type of information that gets through to people?
I don't know. There's a lot of people, I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to get through to people because they listen to me. But I know that pressuring people, and especially people that it doesn't make for them want to change and want to learn, to pressure them into something or to put too much pressure on them. So the first thing is you have to show them compassion and love and make your love unconditional. You show people unconditional love and that you care about them no matter how they live, no matter how they eat. And then they're more likely to be able to listen, to want to hear anything you have to say. And the best thing to do is to model the right behavior and let them ask you more questions so you're not pressuring on them. So it's showing people love and compassion, being a great role model of your health, being a great example of good health yourself. And that's going to give you the ability to influence most people, even people you care about.
Great. Is there any difference between sweet potatoes and regular potatoes?
I think
Yams?
I think that sweet potatoes have more phytonutrients in them than regular potatoes. And I'm not people against eating any potatoes. I'm just recommending they not make their diet too heavy in potato because it's going to lose the nutritional variety. But keep in mind that a sweet potato may have more antioxidants and phytonutrients, and the white potato may even be more glycemically unfavorable. But you can still make a mashed potato with, let's say, I make a great mashed potato with 6 cups of cauliflower, with one Yukon Gold potato, with some roasted garlic, nutter in there, and some fried onion, and some most amazingly tasting mashed potato, but it only has one potato for like 6 people. You know what I mean? So it's because it's a little more calorically favorable, so yes. I think that when people need less calories because their caloric window is low and they need less calories, not more, to lose weight, then they're better off modulating their beans. So they still eat their beans and then they lower their potatoes a little more, as opposed to eating more potatoes and less beans. I'm saying on your plate, when you're looking at your plate at night for dinner, make sure your plate is mostly green vegetables with some beans, and then the amount of sweet potato you may want to eat could be more if you're a big guy and you're physically active and an athlete, but has to be less if you're looking to lose weight and you're a smaller person with a smaller caloric need. So yes, even sweet potato is not as metabolically favorable a food or as much anti-cancer benefit compared to something like a soybean or a black bean or a black lentil or something. And so people should, based on their caloric needs, they should eat a reasonable amount. Now, I do eat sweet potato, of course, but I want to make sure I'm eating enough beans and greens and all the other things I'm supposed to be eating. Then I can also have my sweet potato because I did enough exercise today and I have enough caloric room to have both those things. But if I wasn't have the ability to be physically active and burn off calories, I wouldn't have the ability to be able to eat the lentils, the beans and the green vegetables and the sweet potato and the nuts. I wouldn't have enough caloric room on my plate to eat it all. But with the exercise I'm doing, I could eat all of that stuff. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, that concludes our time for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Fuhrman, for sharing all the information you shared with us today. If we can unmute the audience so they can share their appreciation for the doctor.
Thank you.
I think he might be in tech right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate all the